Hello and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf. Conversations around democracy and its development outcomes for citizens, especially on the African continent, where the concept as practiced today is relatively new, will always be relevant. Where the conduct of elections in Nigeria, the judgment of courts in places where they have been disputed, and the outbreak of coups in neighboring countries, Africans do question each day if this is the right system of government for them, given its promise of freedom and prosperity and the reality of squalor many of its citizens have found themselves. The latest intervention on the matter was from no other than a former president who is not afraid of controversy. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo says Africa might need to do away with liberal democracy as currently practiced and fashion out its own unique form, which he already proposes a name for, afro-democracy. According to him, democracy as currently practiced is a government of a few people over a large population of people, leaving a great majority out of government. But is liberal democracy really the enemy here, or how many African leaders have chosen to practice it? On Hard Copy tonight, I speak with Dahiru, who is a columnist and a technical team member of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation. Always lovely to have you on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much.
Last time we spoke was just immediately after the elections were conducted, and we had some conversations around our democracy and how the conduct of elections leave us even more sensitive as a people, after each of the conduct. But let's talk about President Olusegun Obasanjo now proposing afro-democracy. A simple definition of democracy is supposed to be a government of the people. Maybe we should define that. Majority of the people, right? Of the people, by the people, and for the people. But the president says, no, this is a democracy that leaves out majority of the people, especially when it comes to decision taking. What are your thoughts on this? I don't know if you've had time to really mull over it.
Yes, I mean, like many other Nigerians, we've been concerned about what democracy means to us. We've been on this journey for 24 years, since 1999.
Indeed.
And as the years go by, it's beginning to look as though a democracy as practiced in Nigeria has not actually yielded dividends in the form of improved security and welfare for the majority of the Nigerian people. And so people are beginning to question the very relevance of democracy to our socio-economic and political development as a people. And not just in Nigeria, but I think across the African continent. And so you've seen extra-constitutional and ultra-democratic interventions in a number of countries that are quite popular. People are well receptive of some of these kind of changes, and I'm sure the world would be worried. And so nearer home here, we've had people express similar sentiments. And so when the president, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, came out to say, maybe we need to take a second look at what we've been practicing and see if we can fashion out one that suits us the most. My impression is that, like many other Nigerians, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, a very revered African statesman, may have been, out of frustration, if you ask me, also decided that probably what is wrong with us is our democracy and not the way it is being operated. And that is where we need to put some of these conversations in proper context in order to have a positive outcome by way of solution to our problems. So I think that democracy is the best form of government.
It's interesting. Yes. It's interesting that he doesn't say that we should do away with democracy. In fact, what he proposes has democracy at the end.
Yes.
I mean, it says afro-democracy. In other words, it looks like what he quarrels with is liberal democracy.
Democracy is liberal by its very nature. And let me put this out as clearly as I can. Out of frustration, again, I'm sure our former president may not have actually looked at the whole issues holistically in a manner that may have not elicit the kind of proposition he's making. I say this because the Afro-democracy he's proposing is what we actually practice at the moment.
Oh.
The liberal democracy he's talking about that we should do away with is something we've never practiced in Nigeria since independence. So the problem with us is not liberal democracy. We are not practicing liberal democracy. We don't practice liberal democracy. What we've practiced is actually afro-democracy, something that is strange to democracy, something that is an anathema to democracy.
Why are you naming it afro-democracy?
Because if you look at the nature of the African states, these are countries that are only a conglomeration of multi-ethnic and religious groupings. And so most of the structures of the state actually are delineated along ethnic and religious fault lines. So if you look at Nigeria, for example, your 36 state structure, your 774 local government structure, your 109 senatorial districts, your 260 House of Reps constituencies are all largely delineated along ethnic and religious fault lines. And so what that has done is that right from the very foundation of the Nigerian state, it has birthed the politics of identity, ethnic and religious identity. And identity politics by its very nature is an anathema to democracy and does not qualify to be called liberal democracy. And that is the problem we're having in Nigeria and most African countries. You know why? The major reward system for identity politics is a corrupt form of patronage. And that's why prebendalism as a political terminology has been used to describe Nigeria in a very unique form by international scholars, whereby elected and appointed public officers are actually, it is expected of them to convert their areas of responsibility in government across the executive, judicial, and legislative arms of government into ethnic fiefdoms for their major benefit and the benefit of their sections of the country. So by this system, corrupt practices such as nepotism, cronyism, favoritism, and all forms of isms that ordinarily the Constitution actually prohibits are legitimate cultural tools to extract from what you call the national cake for the various sections of the country. And so Nigeria currently, arising from identity politics that have become so rife and entrenched in the system, has a problem of corruption. But this problem is made even worse by the fact that corruption has legitimacy in Nigeria. And that is why it has corrupted the state and it has rendered the state impotent and unable to fulfill the primary responsibility of government, which is security and welfare for the people.
Well, just in case my viewers are wondering, I took the liberty to quickly, just a simple Google check of what liberal democracy is. It says it's a form of government that combines the structure of a representative democracy with the principles of liberal political philosophy. It's characterized by elections between multiple distinct political parties, a separation of powers into different branches of government, the rule of law in everyday life as part of an open society, a market economy with private property, universal suffrage, and the equal protection of human rights, civil liberties, and political freedoms for all peoples.
That is, for a country that's as diverse as the United States of America, for example, a multiracial country, and a country like also the United Kingdom, liberal democracy has been applied effectively and positively because it has provided equality of citizenship, democratic citizenship for all of its peoples, whether they are black, whether they are Indians, whether they are Asians, whether they are Euro-white people. Equality of citizenship, such that the political parties that are operational in these countries are broad-based political parties that bring people of different backgrounds together around a common cause for national development that is subscribed to freely in a very liberal atmosphere. But people who feel that, okay, maybe if we go left economically, things can be done right. So if you find the Labour Party of the UK, for example, that's a left-wing political party, blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, Indians, equally represented. If you go to the Conservative Party of the UK, for example, you find the same number of people, the same diversity of people congregating there because of the ethos of conservatism.
Yeah, but you now have, you now have what they call far rights. You have people who are beginning to become racist.
Extreme, racist.
Yes,
but the good thing is in some of these countries, the system has been entrenched around liberal democratic ethos such that whenever there are attempts by the far right, for example, and even the far left too, to overrun the system, they are systemically checked. In the case of Nigeria, for example, what we have is a far right
A fire right.
A far-right political movement across the country that is rooted in ethnicity and religion. I will not seem to recognize this. You see, our brand of tribalism is worse than racism, for example. And so, the purpose of political power in Nigeria is to grab power by all means possible for the purpose of ethnic and religious domination. So it's not liberal in its nature at all. And this is what we need to reverse. We need to become a normal country. We need to transform from being a country of tribesmen to a nation of citizens, where the ethos of liberal democracy, which has put some of the most prosperous countries ahead of others, can also apply to us. And the good thing is this. With the current configuration of Nigeria as a country of tribesmen, where identity politics is rife, no system will work for it. None. You won't have democracy working for it. You won't have dictatorship working for it. You won't have any system at all working for it, because systems work for nations of citizens, not countries of tribesmen, with a wide array of identity dissonance.
Yeah, but we have to also remember that we're coming from somewhere.
Yes.
You talked about how we've developed some cultural tools, it would seem to advance our, cultural tendencies. I don't know whether that is rooted in terms of where it is that we're coming from. Does it have any flowing? Because these countries we're talking about, they have over the years evolved these things, and suited it to fit, developed it. Those that wanted to still keep their monarchies, still managed to keep their monarchies, define a role for them, and know what it is that they want to do with, everyday ordinary citizens. And in Nigeria, we have kept our traditional systems, and we've adopted something and we've superimposed on those traditional systems, but we don't seem to have the respect which we ought to have for the system which we have imposed on ourselves, as much as we do for the traditional systems. And somehow it seems that there is a mishmash of what exactly we're supposed to be doing.
Yes, a confused state of affairs, so to say. Every country we've seen in the world today, from the Middle East to the Far East to Western Europe and North America, that have made appreciable progress in terms of being able to provide security and welfare for citizens and meeting up with the obligation of the state to its people. You discover that such entities, such sovereign entities, have been able to also simultaneously build nation states out of just being geographical expressions. Nation states that have been able to also evolve a united, socially cohesive nation states of citizens, where there is a national identity underneath which the various ethnic and religious identities have been collapsed to give rise to pan-national idealism, so to say. So, for example, you go to Saudi Arabia. Before Saudi made the kind of progress it has made today, it was able to first build a Saudi nation out of the many Arab tribes that congregated around that territory, through statecraft, through purposeful leadership. And so you have a socially cohesive Saudi Arabian nation today.
Even though it's not a democracy.
Even though it's not a democracy. Socially cohesive and united Saudi Arabian nation today, from its multi-ethnic and multiracial composition. Most people don't know that Saudi Arabia is perhaps more diverse than Nigeria in terms of racial composition. Whereas Nigeria is largely a mono-racial country of black African peoples, Saudi Arabia is a multiracial country. But they have leadership that recognized from the beginning, from the word go, that you can't have any form of development at all. That the condition preceding the national development is social cohesion and national unity, brought about by democratic citizenship and the administration of the states with the principles of equity, fairness, and justice to all, as espoused in the ideals of liberal democracy. And so they have a monarchy that enjoys the legitimacy of their people, which makes it democratic in a way. The same thing is with China. The same thing is with Western Europe. The same thing is with the United States of America, Canada, and some other prosperous North African entities. But with Nigeria and other African countries, we have not been able to evolve our countries, our respective countries, into nations of citizens. You see, a citizen is detribalized, he's deserialized, he's without religious bigotry. He looks upon his fellow citizen with empathy, and he understands that he should judge his fellow countryman with the content of his character not by the color of his skin or tribe marks on his face.
Well, some people have said that largely the reason our democracy hasn't worked is because majority of our population are not educated. They're not enlightened to understand what their roles are or what is expected of them as citizens under a democratic dispensation. And you need a certain level of education for democracy as espoused by its founders to work.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Very, very, very true. And unfortunately, we've not had leaders that see the need to do this, see the need to deliberately take steps to educate and enlighten the people about democratic citizenship. When we talk about people not being educated enough about issues around democracy, it's not that they don't have degrees in accounting or engineering or medicine. It's because they are lacking in enlightenment and awareness of democratic citizenship. So essentially, Nigerians, as populated as we are in this country, we are largely tribesmen who think along tribal and religious lines when it comes to exercising democratic franchise. We do not think collectively most times as citizens that are out to have a collective bargain for our own economic and social interest.
But it wasn't always so, was it?
It was so far from the beginning. And this is the sad reality. And that was why the First Republic collapsed, under the weight of identity politics.
Where is this engineering, this education supposed to come from? Because, I mean, I'm just looking at myself and I'm wondering when did I become aware of, for instance, where I come from, where my ethnic affiliation should be. And it wasn't until much, 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 much later in my life. While growing up, people just wanted to be able to, go to school, get a degree, do things as ordinary citizens would want to. It was much later that, this awareness, it seemed like it was imposed. And I think that's a reality for many Nigerians. They found out that if you do not associate with a particular ethnic group or you're affiliated, then a lot of things are going to pass you by.
Exactly. I'm sure, like me and most other young Nigerians, we grew up in the era of military rule. So I think the military, by way of institutional arrangement, between 1966 and 1979, they did a fantastic job at bringing about social cohesion and national unity in this country. And this was reversed again when the civilians took over in 1979. And once we went into a democratic election, again, people went back to their ethnic cocoons. And
so it's the politicians?
It's the politicians, because that's the only way we know how to play politics. So when the military also returned, they tried to, restore that cohesion again. But by this time, the damage that was done by the civilians between 1979 and 1983 has become so entrenched that it affected the military eventually. So even the military became infected with the virus of identity politics. And since 1999, we have tried in various degrees to build a nation. And I must give credit to President Olusegun Obasanjo. He remains a shining example of what a statesman should be, of what a detribalized leader should be. And that is why the era between 1999 and 2007, when he was president, remains the golden era of Nigeria, economically and socially.
There are those who disagree with you, and one of them is the president's spokesperson who has disputed very strongly. I mean, who has said that the president has no right to be speaking right now, that he was the one who, for a number of people, they thought that his proposal that we go back to we start a presidential system of government has gotten us into this mess. They believe that the parliamentary system worked better in that particular area. They also believe that he had all of 8 years to do some social engineering in terms of, right now elections are conducted. They're also very well disputed. Election rigging was rife between the time the president was president, 1999 2007. In fact, the president who succeeded him in office was rather embarrassed by the kind of elections that produced him, that he had to sit, to see how he could come up with electoral reforms. So for a number of people, they think, yes, he's speaking now, but it's too late for him to be saying anything on this particular matter.
You see, I'm speaking of him in terms of his ability to govern the country as diverse as Nigeria, or as plural as Nigeria, in a manner that did not marginalize or favor his own ethnic group or others. He did an excellent job at diversity management. And I'm saying, whether as a dictator, whether as a not so democratic president, in whatever form he did it, that credit goes to him. And I'm saying we need to revisit the question of building the Nigerian nation first. And you talked about education earlier. I was excited when the immediate past administration decided to introduce history into school curriculum. But as excited as I was, I also had my reservations. What manner of history are we going to be teaching our children at basic education levels? Is it the history that tells them that the entire ethnic groupings in Nigeria are so disparately different and they cannot be formed into a cohesive nation? Or is it one that tells them, for example, that all of us as Nigerians, all the constituent peoples in Nigeria are one people and are interconnected through our cultures, our languages, our traditions, and our common geography? Is that the kind of history we want to teach our children, or the other one? Is it the kind of history that will make the child in Borno, who is of Kanuri heritage, to recognize his similarity, his oneness, his commonality with his fellow Nigerian child in Bayelsa, who is of Ijaw heritage, enough to understand that he should desire for himself what he desires for that compatriot because of the new national belief system of our oneness as a people. So, in essence, this education we're talking about has to come by way of a holistic approach through the regular educational curriculum, through national reorientation, and through leadership by example by the political class, to demonstrate the oneness of the Nigerian people, to make Nigerians begin to break free of their ethnic and religious cocoons, to begin to come together as a people to ask questions that are common to all.
Is this worthy of a national conversation? Do you think that this conversation needs to be elevated?
Yes, and I think the current president, Ahmed Bola Tinubu, has started this conversation, but he needs to act on what he's been saying.
When did he start it?
In a number of his speeches, he has said that Nigeria is like one household with the different ethnic groupings living in different rooms in that household, which means we're essentially one people. And I'm happy that he has this belief in himself that Nigerians are one people, are members of the same household. But he needs to demonstrate and walk this talk by putting in place deliberate measures to transform Nigerians from tribesmen to citizens. Otherwise, the current configuration of the Nigerian state and the level of awareness, the level of consciousness cannot sustain democracy, neither can it even sustain dictatorship. You need to have citizens to sustain any system of government that can actually provide security and welfare for them. As it stands today, in every round of election, people are more concerned about their ethnic group, what they will get. So in a country where it is not possible, for example, to be Igbo and be Lagos, or to be Yoruba and be Anambra, or to be Hausa and be Rivers, or be Ijaw and be Kano, such a country cannot sustain democracy because it will continue to thrive in identity politics. And the major reward system for identity politics is corruption, and corruption of the state along with all of its apparatus for the benefit of a few that are privileged to be in power.
Well, it's certainly food for thought. And I think that, as an assignment for all of us to continue to ask how we're contributing to this corruption and these divisions within our country. Well, I have to thank you very much for coming on Hard Copy, Dahiru.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's the program tonight. But your feedback is very important to us and is very welcome. Please speak to us using the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Yusuf. Good night.